It didn't start with screaming. It didn't start with insults or tears or hands being shoved away. It started quietly, almost imperceptibly, the way a storm begins in the distance, when the clouds gather unnoticed, when the air feels a little heavier than usual, when the weight of the world presses in just a little too hard. Amy Slaton had been tired before. Everyone knew she was tired. Tired had become a defining part of her, not just in body, but in spirit. 2 young children, a divorce that left more cracks than she wanted to admit, sleepless nights, endless responsibilities, and cameras constantly following her every move. Tired wasn't just a mood. It was her existence. It had become a rhythm, a pulse she moved to without thinking. But this time, the fatigue was different. It wasn't just weariness. It wasn't just the exhaustion that comes from parenting or being under the unrelenting microscope of public attention. This was something deeper, something lodged in her bones, a pressure that pressed on her chest and made her stomach twist into knots. She could feel it growing every day, every hour, every minute, like a weight pressing down that no amount of rest could lift. Amy had been in the shadow of her sister, Tammy, for as long as she could remember. Not just a sibling shadow, but the shadow of responsibility. She had always been the buffer, the mediator, the one who softened Tammy's anger, translated her moods, anticipated the needs of a family that never seemed to sleep, never seemed to stop judging, never seemed to stop expecting. She had mastered the art of compromise, learned to bend without breaking, smile without giving in, speak without being heard. And it worked for a long time, until it didn't. Until the pressure of holding everyone else together began to crack her own foundation. The world didn't see the cracks. The cameras didn't see the cracks. Even her family barely noticed until it was too late. Amy had learned to absorb the emotional fallout, to keep the chaos away from others, to wear her patience like armor. But armor can only take so much, and every insult, every sharp word, every glance of disapproval added another dent. Another crack. Another layer of strain that left her teetering on the edge of losing herself entirely. The moment of rupture didn't arrive suddenly. It had been accumulating for months, maybe years. Each decision she had made that wasn't perfect had been catalogued. Every perceived failure, every slip, every wrong choice piled up in the silent ledger of guilt and self-doubt. It started when she didn't sleep, then when she skipped her vitamins, then when the CPAP machine, the very machine that could save her life, sat untouched for nights at a time. The daily responsibilities that once felt manageable became mountains she could barely climb. Waking up was an effort, facing the day a battle. The world, which had always been a chaotic, messy place, now seemed like it was actively working against her. Every step she took forward was met with scrutiny. Every decision was questioned. Every meal, every movement, every plan dissected. Her family, in their good intentions, only made it worse. They watched her closely, not realizing that observation can feel like suffocation. What they thought of as concern felt to her like judgment, accusation, and surveillance. The more they tried to help, the more Amy felt cornered, trapped in her own house, surrounded by people who claimed to love her but who seemed incapable of understanding the weight she carried. Their words, meant as guidance, came across as lectures. Their advice, meant as support, felt like chains. And she had no energy left to fight politely. No energy left to pretend that everything was fine. No energy left to smile when she felt like screaming. The frustration simmered, quietly at first, then more visibly, like a kettle heating until the whistle could no longer be contained. The family gatherings, once moments of connection, had become pressure cookers. Comments about food choices, weight, parenting, or sleep routines carried double meanings. Glances lingered too long, as if to measure her worth. Jokes, even the ones meant to lighten the mood, felt like barbs aimed at her insecurities. Amy's patience wore thinner with each passing moment. She tried to laugh at first, a defense mechanism she had perfected over the years, but laughter takes energy, and she had none to spare. It was impossible to laugh when the weight of every expectation pressed down relentlessly. She felt trapped in a cycle she couldn't escape. Every action she took, no matter how small, became a referendum on her worth, her effort, her ability to function in a world that seemed determined to challenge her at every turn. Amy's divorce had left her more vulnerable than she wanted to admit. The separation from Michael didn't just end a marriage. It ended stability, a shared sense of purpose, a partner to share the burden. Suddenly, she was the single parent, the primary caregiver, the one responsible for everything without the safety net she had once relied on. The pressure that had always been there intensified, magnified by the absence of support. She carried the weight of her children, her family, and her own expectations alone. And she was failing, or at least that's how it felt. Every misstep, every lapse, every moment of weakness felt monumental. And no one seemed to understand just how heavy that burden was. Everyone had advice, everyone had opinions, everyone had expectations, and none of it made her life easier. It only made her feel smaller, more isolated, more invisible. And then came the moments that would later be replayed on screens, analyzed, dissected, turned into clickbait and sound bites. The shouting, the shoving, the tears. To the family, it was chaos. To Amy, it was inevitability. She had been pushed, prodded, judged, and questioned for too long. The storm inside her had been building, and eventually it overflowed. She wasn't lashing out at random. She was reacting to the weight of months of neglecting herself in order to care for everyone else. She was reacting to the pressure of being constantly scrutinized while her own needs were ignored. She was reacting to a world that demanded perfection from her while forgiving mistakes in everyone else. The first visible crack came during a family conversation that should have been simple. Tammy had returned from her medical facility, moving carefully, cautiously, trying to regain independence. Amy was expected to help, guide, support. But the moment was tense, fragile, loaded with unspoken judgments. Words were exchanged, questions, advice, warnings, reprimands. Amy tried to respond calmly, tried to explain herself, tried to assert boundaries without confrontation. But the family's well-meaning interjections felt like attacks. They talked over her, corrected her, questioned her authority, questioned her choices. Every sentence she tried to form was interrupted, twisted, misunderstood. She felt cornered, unheard, unseen. And the simmering frustration that had been growing inside her for months, years even, erupted. Voices rose. Words were shouted. Tears spilled. The physicality, the shove, the defensiveness, the sudden explosion of emotion didn't happen in a vacuum. It was the culmination of every small moment of dismissal, every glance of judgment, every subtle insinuation that she was failing as a mother, as a sister, as a woman trying to hold her life together. Amy wasn't just reacting in the moment. She was reacting to a history of being overlooked, underestimated, and emotionally overextended. The chaos that ensued wasn't a sudden breakdown. It was a long-delayed eruption, the result of pressure that had been building for years. And when it happened, when the yelling, the crying, and the shoving took center stage, everyone was caught off guard. They saw the surface, the anger, the tears, the shock, but they didn't see the deep, simmering frustration that had led her there. They didn't see the exhaustion that made it impossible for her to respond with patience. They didn't see the fear that if she didn't assert herself in that moment, she would lose control entirely. They only saw the result, the visible crack in a person who had spent years holding herself together for the sake of others. Amy felt a mixture of relief and terror. Relief because finally, the weight of holding everything in had been released. Terror because she knew there would be consequences, judgment, perhaps shame. She knew the world, family, cameras, social media, viewers, would see only the eruption, not the storm that had brewed for years behind it. She knew that in exposing her breaking point, she risked criticism, misunderstanding, and rejection. But in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was that the pressure had to be released, that the voice she had silenced for so long had to be heard, even if it came out in anger and tears. And the aftermath was just beginning. Conversations would be replayed, judgments would be made, interpretations formed without context. Social media would dissect her every word, every expression, every tear. Viewers would see chaos and label her as dramatic, emotional, difficult, unstable. But they wouldn't see the years of weight she carried, the sacrifices made silently, the boundaries ignored, the exhaustion that had become part of her existence. They wouldn't see the woman who had kept everyone else together while falling apart quietly inside. Amy Slaton had snapped. And it wasn't just a moment. It was a culmination, a confession, a declaration that the pressure of perfection, expectation, and relentless scrutiny had become unbearable. And now, the family had to reckon with it. She had made the breaking point visible, undeniable, impossible to ignore. And once the line was crossed, there was no easy way back. Because the truth was simple, stark, and terrifying. Amy didn't just snap in that moment. She had been fraying for years. And the breaking wasn't just emotional, it was a reckoning with everything she had carried alone, everything she had sacrificed, and everything she had buried deep inside to survive. And so the first storm broke. The shouting, the tears, the shoving, the chaos, all visible. The build-up, the quiet pressure, the relentless expectations invisible. But together, they painted the full picture of a woman pushed too far, a woman trapped in her own life, a woman finally forced to confront everything she had tried to endure silently. And even as the cameras rolled, even as the family reacted, even as viewers would later watch in shock, Amy Slaton's story was just beginning to unfold, tangled with anger, fear, love, guilt, and the desperate desire to be seen, understood, and cared for in the midst of chaos. The tension in the house didn't dissipate after that first explosion. It lingered in the air like smoke from a fire that hadn't fully died out, clinging to walls, furniture, and even the family themselves. Every step, every glance, every word carried the weight of what had just happened. Amy could feel it pressing down on her, making her chest tight, her thoughts tangled, her movements heavy. She tried to function, to speak, to move through the house as if nothing had happened, but the energy in the rooms betrayed her. Tammy's eyes followed her constantly, wary, cautious, as if expecting another eruption at any moment. Her children sensed it too, their usual laughter muted, their questions tentative. The cameras, merciless observers of private pain, captured every nuance, every pause, every hesitated breath, documenting what would later be replayed endlessly. Amy felt trapped, not by the walls of her home, but by the history of conflict, by the unresolved tension that now demanded attention, by the knowledge that there was no going back to the fragile equilibrium they had maintained before. Amy's mind raced constantly, circling over every moment of that afternoon, analyzing, criticizing, questioning. She replayed every word she had said, every tone she had used, every gesture, trying to understand where things had gone so catastrophically wrong. Guilt gnawed at her. She wondered if she had overreacted, if she had been too harsh, if she had let the pressure of her emotions dictate her behavior in a way that hurt those she loved most. And yet, there was another voice inside her, quieter but insistent, reminding her that her reaction was inevitable, that the strain had been building for years, that the breaking point was not a choice but a consequence. She had been managing the chaos for so long, absorbing the anger, the criticism, the expectations, and pretending it didn't affect her, that it was impossible not to finally crack under the weight. This internal conflict tore at her, a tug-of-war between self-blame and self-preservation, between the desire to apologize and the need to assert her boundaries. Tammy, for her part, was also unraveling in her own way. She had watched the events unfold, her own frustrations and insecurities bubbling to the surface. The anger she felt at being confronted so directly by Amy mixed with guilt for the years she had relied on her sister to shoulder responsibilities she should have shared. Tammy was conflicted, caught between empathy and defensiveness, between wanting to comfort and needing to protect herself. The cameras didn't capture the complexity of her emotions, the subtle shifts in posture, the hesitation in her speech, the fleeting moments of self-reflection that occurred as she tried to navigate the aftermath. The house felt like a pressure cooker, every interaction charged with potential volatility, and every family member tiptoed around one another, fearing that any misstep could ignite another storm. Amy found herself retreating into isolation, seeking refuge in her bedroom, a space that had once been a sanctuary but now felt like a cage. She closed the door, curled up on the edge of her bed, and let the tears come freely, unrestrained by the need to appear strong, composed, or in control. The crying was both cathartic and exhausting, a physical manifestation of the emotional release she had denied herself for so long. She reflected on the years of compromise, the countless moments she had put others first, the decisions she had made to maintain peace at the expense of her own well-being. Each memory carried a pang of regret, a twinge of resentment, and a lingering sense of injustice. She wondered how much longer she could continue living in a state of constant tension, how much more she could absorb before the next eruption, and whether anyone in her family truly understood the weight she carried. The children, sensing their mother's vulnerability, approached her cautiously. Their small voices and tentative touches were attempts at comfort, attempts at connection, but they also reminded Amy of the responsibilities she could not escape. Holding her children in her arms, she felt both relief and pressure, the duality of maternal love and duty pressing down on her. She whispered reassurances to them, even as she struggled to reassure herself. The paradox of motherhood, the desire to protect, nurture, and provide stability while feeling emotionally and physically depleted, was never more apparent than in these quiet moments. Amy's heart ached with love and exhaustion, pride and frustration, hope and fear, all tangled together in a knot that seemed impossible to untangle. Outside the walls of their home, the world moved on obliviously. Social media users would later speculate endlessly about Amy's behavior, posting clips of her emotional outburst, dissecting her tone, body language, and expressions. Some viewers expressed sympathy, understanding the immense pressures she faced, while others were quick to criticize, labeling her as volatile, dramatic, or incapable. The dichotomy of public perception mirrored the dichotomy within her own life, the tension between who she was, who she wanted to be, and who others expected her to be. The cameras, ever-present witnesses to her life, amplified both the scrutiny and the isolation, creating a feedback loop that intensified every emotion, every worry, every doubt. Amy felt both exposed and invisible, her private struggles broadcast to millions while her personal pain remained largely misunderstood. The aftermath of the confrontation revealed cracks in the family's relationships that had long been present, but previously concealed under layers of routine and familiarity. Conversations became careful negotiations, interactions measured and deliberate. Each family member grappled with their own emotions, navigating guilt, anger, frustration, and empathy simultaneously. The delicate balance that had maintained their household was shattered, leaving uncertainty in its wake. Amy observed these dynamics with a mixture of apprehension and resolve, recognizing that the future of her relationships depended on how they collectively addressed the turmoil. Communication, previously taken for granted, now carried immense weight, each word a potential spark or a bomb, each silence a possible rupture or a moment of reflection. As the days passed, Amy began to recognize the importance of setting boundaries and asserting her needs. She initiated conversations with her family, attempting to articulate the pressures she had been under, the reasons behind her emotional response, and the changes she hoped to see moving forward. These discussions were fraught with tension, as family members grappled with their own defensiveness, pride, and insecurities. Compromise was difficult, requiring patience, empathy, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Amy's emotional intelligence, honed through years of mediating conflicts and managing expectations, became both a tool and a challenge as she sought to navigate a path that honored her own well-being while preserving the integrity of her familial bonds. The journey toward understanding was neither linear nor easy. There were setbacks, moments of frustration, and renewed conflicts that tested the limits of patience and resilience. Amy's mental and emotional health became a central concern, prompting her to seek support through therapy, reflection, and self-care practices. She learned to recognize the signs of emotional overload, to articulate her needs clearly, and to establish boundaries that protected her well-being without alienating those she loved. The process was gradual, requiring ongoing effort, self-reflection, and the willingness to confront deeply ingrained patterns of behavior. Each small step toward clarity and balance represented a victory, a reclamation of agency, and a commitment to emotional survival. Throughout this period, Amy's sense of self evolved. She began to reclaim aspects of her identity that had been suppressed in the service of family obligations and societal expectations. Hobbies, interests, and personal goals once sidelined were revisited, providing outlets for expression, creativity, and rejuvenation. The act of prioritizing herself did not diminish her love for her family. Rather, it enhanced her capacity to engage with them meaningfully, without the constant undercurrent of resentment or exhaustion. Amy discovered that self-care was not selfish but essential, a prerequisite for sustainable relationships and emotional resilience. The tension that had erupted in that pivotal moment did not disappear, but it became a catalyst for growth. The family, initially shaken by the intensity of the confrontation, began to recognize the necessity of honest communication, mutual respect, and shared responsibility. Patterns of behavior that had gone unexamined for years were scrutinized, challenged, and, in some cases, restructured. Amy's vulnerability became a mirror for others, encouraging introspection, empathy, and a willingness to confront difficult truths. The process was messy, emotional, and ongoing, but it laid the foundation for a more authentic and balanced family dynamic. Amy's journey was also a personal reckoning. She confronted long-standing fears, insecurities, and patterns of self-neglect, learning to navigate the delicate balance between emotional expression and self-regulation. The experience reinforced the importance of acknowledging her own humanity, embracing imperfection, and accepting that mistakes were inevitable. Through reflection, dialogue, and support, she cultivated resilience, empathy, and self-compassion, transforming the intensity of the crisis into an opportunity for growth, connection, and deeper understanding. As the months passed, Amy began to experience a renewed sense of agency and empowerment. She approached challenges with greater clarity, confidence, and emotional awareness, navigating conflicts with intentionality rather than reaction. Her relationships, while still evolving, were strengthened by increased transparency, mutual accountability, and the integration of healthy boundaries. The lessons learned through crisis and reflection reverberated across every aspect of her life, shaping her interactions, decisions, and perspective in profound ways. The storm that had once threatened to overwhelm her became a source of insight, strength, and transformation, illuminating the path forward with both caution and hope. The aftermath of that emotional upheaval was still palpable in every corner of the Slaton household. Amy had begun to carve out small pockets of personal time, moments where she could exist without the weight of expectation pressing down on her chest. Even so, the family's dynamics remained fragile, every interaction a careful negotiation between past grievances and present attempts at understanding. Tammy, too, was learning to navigate this new reality, testing boundaries and seeking reassurance, while simultaneously confronting her own long-suppressed frustrations. Their interactions were like walking a tightrope. One misstep, one sharp word, could send years of tension tumbling into chaos again. Amy's days were now a delicate balancing act. She had to manage her personal well-being while maintaining a semblance of harmony in the home, a task made more complex by the ever-present cameras capturing her every movement. The public scrutiny weighed heavily on her, amplifying minor missteps into perceived catastrophes. She was constantly aware of how her actions might be interpreted by viewers, fans, and critics, which added an extra layer of pressure to her already fraught emotional state. Despite the strain, Amy began to recognize the importance of authenticity. She realized that suppressing her feelings for the sake of appearances only led to more explosive confrontations and deeper resentment. The children, perceptive as they were, sensed the shift in the household atmosphere. They approached their mother cautiously, attuned to her moods, hesitating to express their own emotions for fear of triggering another outburst. Amy felt a profound mixture of love, guilt, and determination as she navigated these moments. She wanted to provide stability and comfort, but she also had to acknowledge her own limits. The delicate interplay between nurturing her children and caring for herself became a central theme of her daily life, a continuous negotiation that required both patience and vigilance. Each day was a test of endurance, an exercise in emotional regulation, and a chance to rebuild trust, slowly but deliberately. Tammy's journey mirrored Amy's in complexity, though her challenges were subtly different. She grappled with feelings of inadequacy, guilt, and defensiveness, often reflecting on her own role in the family's dysfunction. Conversations with Amy were tentative at first, filled with pauses, hedged statements, and careful phrasing. Yet, as time progressed, these discussions began to reveal a depth of honesty previously absent. Tammy confronted uncomfortable truths about her own behavior, recognizing patterns of dependency, avoidance, and projection. The process was painful, requiring vulnerability and courage, but it also opened the door to more meaningful connection and mutual understanding. The sisters' relationship, long strained under layers of resentment and unspoken expectations, began to shift, marked by tentative gestures of reconciliation and moments of genuine empathy. Amy also sought support outside of the family unit. Therapy sessions became a sanctuary where she could explore her emotions without judgment, a space where she could dissect the layers of stress, anger, guilt, and anxiety that had accumulated over the years. Through these sessions, she learned to identify triggers, develop coping strategies, and articulate her needs with clarity. The professional guidance offered both validation and perspective, helping her navigate the turbulent waters of family conflict with more confidence and insight. Amy's growth was gradual but steady. Each session, each reflection, each small victory contributed to a sense of empowerment she had not felt in years. Despite the progress, moments of tension continued to arise. Old habits die hard, and both sisters occasionally found themselves slipping back into patterns of criticism, defensiveness, and emotional reactivity. These relapses, though less frequent and less severe than before, reminded Amy that change was not instantaneous. It required patience, vigilance, and constant effort. Every disagreement became an opportunity for reflection, every argument a lesson in communication. Amy's growing self-awareness allowed her to approach conflicts with a measured response, choosing when to engage, when to step back, and when to assert boundaries firmly but calmly. The cameras, ever watchful, documented these subtle shifts in family dynamics. Clips of quiet conversations, moments of shared laughter, or gentle reconciliations began to appear alongside the dramatic outbursts of the past. Viewers saw a more nuanced portrait of the Slaton family, one that balanced vulnerability with resilience, conflict with connection. Amy's public persona evolved as well. She was no longer merely the woman who snapped or exploded under pressure, but someone striving to grow, adapt, and maintain her integrity amidst immense challenges. The narrative of chaos slowly gave way to one of human complexity, transformation, and resilience, inviting empathy as much as scrutiny. In the midst of this personal evolution, Amy also reflected on her identity beyond the family sphere. She revisited passions and interests that had been neglected, from creative endeavors to social engagements, reclaiming aspects of herself that had been overshadowed by caregiving and conflict management. This process of self-reclamation was liberating but also intimidating, requiring her to step into spaces she had avoided for fear of judgment or failure. Each step forward, whether small or significant, reinforced her sense of agency and self-worth. Amy discovered that personal fulfillment was not only compatible with family responsibilities, but essential for sustaining them in a healthy, balanced manner. The Slaton family's journey was far from linear. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, and periods where frustration threatened to overwhelm progress. Yet, the cumulative effect of small, intentional changes began to manifest in subtle but meaningful ways. Communication improved, Emotional expression became more measured, and the household atmosphere shifted from tense and reactive to cautiously optimistic. Amy observed these changes with a mix of relief and pride, recognizing the resilience, patience, and adaptability required to navigate this complex landscape. Every day became both a challenge and an opportunity, a test of endurance, and a chance for connection. Financial pressures, health concerns, and public expectations continued to intersect with these personal challenges, adding layers of complexity to Amy's life. She juggled appointments, responsibilities, and obligations, all while maintaining the emotional labor required to repair and sustain relationships. Each decision carried weight, each interaction demanded mindfulness, and each choice had the potential to ripple through the family dynamic in unexpected ways. Amy's ability to manage these intersecting pressures became a testament to her strength, resilience, and growing self-awareness. She learned to prioritize effectively, to delegate when possible, and to recognize that she could not control every outcome or satisfy every expectation. Amy also began to explore the role of forgiveness, both for herself and others. She confronted past grievances, misunderstandings, and resentments, striving to release the emotional burden they carried. This process was neither simple nor swift. It required deep introspection, honest dialogue, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Yet, with each step, she experienced a sense of liberation, a reduction in the emotional weight that had long constrained her interactions and decisions. Forgiveness became a tool not just for healing relationships, but for fostering personal growth, emotional resilience, and peace of mind. Through these cumulative efforts, Amy's perspective shifted. She no longer saw conflict as an insurmountable threat, but as an inevitable aspect of human relationships that could be navigated with care, empathy, and intentionality. The family struggles, while painful, became opportunities for learning, connection, and transformation. Amy embraced the complexity of her situation, acknowledging that imperfection, mistakes, and emotional volatility were part of the human experience. This acceptance allowed her to engage with her family more authentically, respond to challenges with measured insight, and cultivate a deeper sense of self-compassion and understanding. The evolution of Amy's emotional landscape influenced every aspect of her life. She approached interactions with greater clarity and intentionality, recognized patterns that needed intervention, and celebrated moments of growth and connection, no matter how small. Each day was a microcosm of the larger journey, a blend of challenge and triumph, tension and release, conflict and reconciliation. Amy's commitment to personal growth, emotional awareness, and family connection became a guiding principle, shaping her decisions, interactions, and sense of purpose in profound ways. As the weeks turned into months, the Slaton household began to reflect this gradual transformation. The intensity of past conflicts diminished, replaced by a cautious optimism and a willingness to engage with vulnerability and empathy. Amy and Tammy's relationship, once strained by unspoken expectations and past grievances, began to exhibit signs of genuine reconciliation, grounded in mutual respect and understanding. Family routines became less fraught, interactions more balanced, and the overall atmosphere, while still imperfect, demonstrated a notable shift toward stability and cooperation. The journey was ongoing, but the trajectory was clear. The family was learning, growing, and adapting, guided by both the lessons of past turmoil and the possibilities of a more intentional future. The Slaton household was beginning to feel like a different space, though not without its lingering shadows. Old habits and unspoken tensions still lurked beneath the surface, and Amy understood that one misstep could rekindle the fires of past conflict. She had come to realize that emotional equilibrium was a fragile thing, requiring constant attention, self-reflection, and intentional communication. The lessons of patience, empathy, and resilience were no longer abstract concepts but daily practices, each moment a test of her ability to navigate complexity without resorting to reactive behavior. Tammy, too, was evolving. Her growth was subtler, more internalized, yet equally significant. She was learning to monitor her impulses, to recognize when her words or actions might exacerbate a situation, and to respond with a combination of honesty and tact. Therapy had helped her confront patterns of dependency, projection, and avoidance that had long dictated her behavior, and she was beginning to integrate these insights into her daily life. Conversations with Amy, once arenas of contention, were increasingly collaborative, punctuated by moments of shared understanding, vulnerability, and even humor. These interactions, while not devoid of tension, were increasingly grounded in mutual respect and an emerging emotional maturity. One afternoon, Amy found herself reflecting on the transformative journey the family had been undertaking. She sat quietly in the living room, observing her children at play, and marveled at their resilience and adaptability. Despite the turbulence that had defined much of their lives, they exhibited moments of joy, creativity, and connection that were both grounding and inspiring. Amy recognized that the lessons she and Tammy were learning were not just about conflict management, but about modeling emotional intelligence, empathy, and authenticity for the next generation. The responsibility was immense, yet it also imbued her efforts with a profound sense of purpose. Amy's self-awareness deepened as she confronted her own emotional triggers with increasing clarity. She began to notice subtle physiological and psychological cues, tension in her shoulders, a racing heartbeat, or a spiraling thought pattern that signaled the onset of stress or frustration. By recognizing these indicators early, she could implement coping strategies, deep breathing, temporary withdrawal, or journaling. These practices became lifelines, allowing her to engage with challenging situations thoughtfully rather than impulsively. Over time, these moments of pause transformed her interactions with her family, reducing the frequency and intensity of conflicts and creating space for more constructive dialogue. The family's communication, once marked by defensiveness and critique, began to take on a more nuanced quality. Amy and Tammy experimented with active listening, reflective responses, and clarifying questions, techniques that helped bridge gaps in understanding. Disagreements, while inevitable, became opportunities for negotiation rather than battlegrounds for dominance or blame. Each successful exchange, no matter how small, reinforced the possibility of sustainable harmony, and the sisters began to recognize that conflict, when managed with intention and awareness, could catalyze growth rather than destruction. Outside the home, Amy's life also began to shift. She re-engaged with friends and social networks she had long neglected, finding joy in conversations unmediated by cameras or public expectation. She pursued creative projects that had been set aside, from writing to artistic expression, reclaiming aspects of her identity that had been overshadowed by caregiving and familial obligations. This reinvestment in herself was not selfish but necessary, providing the emotional resources required to navigate the complexities of her domestic environment. Each step of self-assertion and self-care bolstered her sense of autonomy, resilience, and self-worth. Financial pressures, however, remained a constant backdrop, influencing decisions and heightening stress. The demands of public life, sponsorships, filming schedules, and social media engagement intersected with the practical realities of running a household, creating a complex web of obligations. Amy approached these challenges with the same intentionality she applied to emotional regulation, prioritizing tasks, delegating when possible, and maintaining transparency with Tammy about shared responsibilities. The sisters developed an unspoken rhythm, a system of checks and balances that allowed the household to function with greater efficiency and reduced friction. Health concerns also demanded careful management. Both Amy and Tammy had to remain vigilant about physical well-being, balancing dietary needs, exercise routines, and medical appointments with their other responsibilities. The weight of public scrutiny added pressure to present a composed image, yet they were learning to honor their body's limits and to communicate honestly about struggles and progress. These conversations, once fraught with judgment or comparison, increasingly centered on support, encouragement, and practical problem-solving, fostering a sense of partnership rather than rivalry. The role of therapy continued to be instrumental in maintaining progress. Amy found that regular sessions allowed her to process ongoing challenges, explore emerging insights, and refine strategies for emotional regulation and communication. Tammy, too, benefited from professional guidance, confronting deep-seated fears and insecurities while learning to cultivate self-compassion. Together, the sisters incorporated these lessons into daily life, experimenting with conflict resolution techniques, structured check-ins, and reflective practices that strengthened familial bonds. Despite these advancements, the path was not linear. Setbacks occurred, sometimes triggered by minor disagreements or external pressures. These moments were reminders that emotional growth is iterative, requiring persistence, self-reflection, and forgiveness. Amy and Tammy approached setbacks as opportunities for recalibration, discussing what went wrong, exploring alternative strategies, and reinforcing mutual commitment to improvement. This approach fostered resilience, teaching both sisters that mistakes were not failures, but essential components of a learning process that could ultimately deepen connection and understanding. Amy also began to reflect on her own expectations and judgments, recognizing the ways in which perfectionism and fear of public scrutiny had exacerbated family tension. She worked to release rigid standards, embracing imperfection as a natural part of human experience. This shift in perspective allowed her to engage more authentically with her family, to acknowledge vulnerability without shame, and to extend empathy toward herself and others. The act of relinquishing control over outcomes, while challenging, created space for genuine connection and mutual growth. The children's responses to these changes were equally telling. They observed a calmer, more responsive, and emotionally attuned environment, and their own behavior reflected these adjustments. Moments of defiance or frustration were met with measured guidance rather than reactive punishment, and children increasingly expressed themselves with confidence and clarity. Amy's modeling of emotional regulation and communication had tangible effects, reinforcing the importance of intentionality in shaping family culture. Gradually, the Slaton family began to experience a sense of equilibrium, though always conscious of its tenuous nature. Daily routines were punctuated by rituals of connection, shared meals, reflective conversations, and small gestures of care that reinforced a sense of cohesion and stability. The sisters' evolving relationship, once defined by rivalry and misunderstanding, became characterized by a growing foundation of trust, respect, and empathy. The household, while still subject to challenges and fluctuations, reflected a more intentional, connected, and resilient dynamic. Amy's personal growth extended beyond family interactions. She became increasingly engaged with broader issues of wellness, self-expression, and advocacy. Her experiences navigating public scrutiny, familial conflict, and personal transformation positioned her to offer insights and encouragement to others facing similar struggles. This engagement, whether through social media, community involvement, or personal mentorship, reinforced her sense of purpose and agency, highlighting the potential for individual growth to radiate outward, influencing and inspiring others. As the months progressed, Amy reflected on the cumulative impact of these changes. What had once felt like a chaotic, unmanageable existence was slowly being transformed into a life marked by intention, connection, and growth. The process was ongoing and challenges remained, but the trajectory was clear. Through self-awareness, resilience, empathy, and intentional action, the Slaton family was building a foundation for sustainable harmony and authentic connection. Each day, each interaction, each reflective moment contributed to this evolution, creating a tapestry of experience that blended struggle, insight, and hope. Life within the Slaton household began to settle into rhythms that were unfamiliar, yet deeply grounding. The sisters, once defined by volatility and reactive conflict, were now navigating their days with a sense of intentionality. Amy noticed that even the smallest adjustments, setting boundaries around phone use, establishing predictable mealtime routines, or creating spaces for individual reflection, had an outsized impact on the family dynamic. These structural shifts reduced opportunities for friction, allowing emotional energy to be redirected toward connection and mutual support rather than defensive posturing. Tammy, increasingly mindful of her own emotional patterns, embraced the practice of pausing before responding. Moments that previously would have escalated into arguments were now met with thoughtful consideration, questions for clarification, or simply the choice to step away momentarily. This skill, seemingly simple, had transformative effects. Conversations that had historically spiraled into blame or resentment were now productive, grounded in curiosity and understanding. Over time, the sisters noticed that conflicts became less frequent and less intense, replaced instead by collaborative problem-solving and shared laughter. The children responded to these shifts with an almost instinctive awareness. They observed a household that was less reactive, more predictable, and more emotionally attuned. Their own behaviors began to reflect this environment. Moments of frustration were navigated with words rather than outbursts, and their expressions of joy, curiosity, and creativity flourished. Amy recognized the critical role modeling played in shaping their emotional landscapes. Each interaction was an opportunity to demonstrate patience, resilience, and empathy, planting seeds that would influence their development far beyond the walls of the family home. Yet, external pressures continued to challenge the Slaton family. The public eye, ever present and judgmental, weighed heavily on Amy and Tammy. Comments, social media scrutiny, and the relentless nature of filming demanded a level of emotional resilience that could not be faked. Amy often found herself oscillating between authenticity and performance, seeking to honor her own growth while meeting the expectations of an audience accustomed to drama and spectacle. The tension between private evolution and public perception became a defining struggle, prompting reflection on identity, integrity, and self-determination. Amy's relationship with her own identity deepened during this period. She reflected on her past behaviors, recognizing how fear, shame, and insecurity had often dictated her reactions. She explored her own triggers, examining not only what set her off, but why those patterns persisted. Therapy and introspection revealed layers of unmet needs, internalized criticism, and adaptive behaviors that had once seemed necessary for survival but now hindered authentic expression. Confronting these truths was uncomfortable, yet liberating. Amy began to experiment with new modes of interaction: assertiveness without aggression, vulnerability without fear, and joy without self-consciousness. Tammy, paralleling this journey, began to embrace accountability in ways that had previously felt impossible. She acknowledged the ways in which she had projected her frustrations, allowed resentment to fester, or withheld honest communication out of fear of conflict. By naming these patterns and actively choosing alternatives, she not only transformed her relationship with Amy, but also reshaped her own self-concept. The act of acknowledging past mistakes and actively working to rectify them required courage, humility, and consistency, qualities that Tammy increasingly embodied. Financial and logistical pressures, however, remained a persistent backdrop. The sisters navigated the dual demands of household management and public engagement, balancing sponsorship obligations, filming commitments, and personal projects with the day-to-day operations of a busy family. Amy developed a keen awareness of resource allocation, time management, and delegation, recognizing that the sustainability of their progress depended not only on emotional work, but also on practical structuring of life. Tammy's cooperation and reliability became central to this balance, creating a partnership that was both functional and emotionally supportive. Health continued to be a priority. Amy and Tammy remained vigilant about diet, exercise, and medical care, increasingly framing wellness not as punishment or obligation but as empowerment. The sisters approached physical well-being with the same intentionality as emotional growth, integrating routines that supported vitality, flexibility, and energy. They also modeled these behaviors for their children, instilling habits that prioritized self-care, balance, and body awareness. The interplay of physical and emotional health became increasingly evident. As the sisters strengthened one, the other improved in tandem, creating a positive feedback loop that reinforced the family's overall resilience. Amidst these practical concerns, the sisters began exploring the deeper dimensions of forgiveness, both toward themselves and each other. Amy reflected on past arguments, moments of harshness, and times when pride had obstructed empathy. She allowed herself to release lingering resentment, understanding that clinging to past grievances undermined the hard-earned stability they were cultivating. Tammy mirrored this process, confronting her own regrets and extending genuine apologies where appropriate. The act of mutual forgiveness was not ceremonial but lived, expressed through consistent attention, emotional honesty, and the willingness to rebuild trust moment by moment. The family began to embrace shared rituals that reinforced connection and continuity. Evening check-ins, collaborative meal preparation, and intentional playtime with the children became anchors in their daily life. These practices, while seemingly ordinary, created a scaffold of predictability, emotional safety, and mutual respect. Amy and Tammy found that these rituals served as both preventative and restorative measures. They preempted conflict by fostering connection and repaired minor tensions before they could escalate. In this sense, small, consistent acts of attention carried profound implications for long-term harmony. Amy's creative pursuits also became an essential outlet for processing and articulating her experiences. Writing, photography, and video projects allowed her to externalize internal struggles, explore personal growth, and communicate authenticity to a broader audience. These endeavors were both cathartic and empowering, providing a platform for reflection and self-expression that complemented her emotional work within the household. The creative process reinforced her sense of agency, identity, and resilience, reminding her that growth was not solely relational, but deeply personal. Social engagement further broadened Amy and Tammy's perspectives. Reconnecting with friends, attending community events, and participating in support networks provided fresh lenses through which to view their own challenges. These interactions reinforced the universality of struggle, the value of empathy, and the transformative potential of connection. Exposure to diverse experiences and narratives strengthened the sisters' capacity for patience, perspective-taking, and collaborative problem-solving, enriching their interpersonal toolkit and further stabilizing family dynamics. Despite these gains, the sisters remained acutely aware of the fragility inherent in emotional evolution. One miscommunication, one lapse in patience, or one overlooked tension could trigger setbacks. Amy and Tammy approached these vulnerabilities with humility and vigilance, establishing systems for accountability and mutual support. They implemented check-ins, reflective exercises, and open forums for expressing concerns, creating a culture of continuous improvement rather than complacency. By acknowledging the impermanence of stability, they cultivated resilience, adaptability, and proactive problem-solving skills that fortified both individual and collective growth. Amy's reflections often extended to existential considerations, the nature of family, the role of public visibility, and the pursuit of authentic fulfillment. She considered the ways in which past patterns had constrained her life and the opportunities that present growth afforded. By examining the interplay of past experiences, present actions, and future aspirations, she cultivated a sense of intentionality and narrative coherence. Life was no longer a series of reactive episodes, but a deliberately navigated journey, punctuated by conscious choice, reflection, and the ongoing pursuit of alignment between values, actions, and relationships. The culmination of Amy and Tammy's journey was not marked by a single dramatic event, but by the quiet accumulation of choices, reflections, and actions that redefined their family. Over months and years, the sisters observed how the interplay of intentionality, empathy, and accountability transformed not only their own behaviors, but the very atmosphere of the home. Conflict, once a central pillar of daily life, became rare. When it did arise, it was met with tools and strategies cultivated through experience, introspection, and mutual commitment. Amy's relationship with herself had evolved profoundly. She no longer equated emotional intensity with authenticity, nor allowed shame to dictate her responses. Self-awareness had become a cornerstone of her identity, enabling her to navigate moments of tension without reverting to old patterns of defensiveness or aggression. She cultivated mindfulness, recognizing the transient nature of feelings and the importance of responding rather than reacting. This internal shift radiated outward, influencing her interactions with Tammy, her children, and even the wider community that followed their journey. Tammy, equally transformed, embraced her role as both sister and co-architect of a healthier family dynamic. She integrated lessons learned from past mistakes, balancing assertiveness with compassion and self-interest with empathy. The sisters' partnership evolved into a genuine collaboration, a relationship defined not by hierarchy, blame, or competition, but by shared responsibility, mutual respect, and deep understanding. Together, they navigated the complexities of daily life, public scrutiny, and personal growth with a resilience that seemed almost unshakable. The children, immersed in this more stable and nurturing environment, exhibited remarkable emotional and social growth. They internalized lessons in communication, conflict resolution, and emotional regulation by observing their mother's transformations. Small daily interactions, negotiating turns, expressing needs respectfully, and showing empathy became the foundation for lifelong relational skills. Amy and Tammy recognized that the impact of their personal work extended far beyond themselves, shaping the next generation in ways that would ripple forward indefinitely. Public perception remained a challenging factor. The sisters were acutely aware that the audience expected spectacle, drama, and emotional peaks. Yet, they increasingly chose authenticity over performance, demonstrating that growth, vulnerability, and resilience could be compelling without resorting to sensationalism. Social media posts, interviews, and filmed moments became platforms for transparency and connection rather than for provocation or conflict. Audiences responded, some skeptically at first, others with genuine admiration, validating the sisters' commitment to living their truth rather than conforming to expectation. Amy's creative endeavors continued to flourish as a means of both self-expression and outreach. Her writing, photography, and video projects became vehicles for articulating lessons learned, struggles overcome, and insights gained. These creations reflected the depth of her emotional journey, inviting others to witness and, in some cases, find guidance or inspiration in her experiences. By transforming personal narrative into shared story, Amy extended the impact of her evolution beyond the confines of her home, connecting with a broader community invested in themes of resilience, family, and self-discovery. Health remained an ongoing focus. Amy and Tammy recognized that physical well-being was inseparable from emotional stability. Regular exercise, balanced nutrition, and consistent medical care became non-negotiable components of daily life, not as obligations, but as affirmations of self-worth and longevity. Their commitment to wellness was mirrored in their children, who learned that caring for one's body and mind was an essential practice, not an optional endeavor. The household culture increasingly emphasized holistic health, intertwining physical, emotional, and relational vitality in ways that reinforce stability and growth. Financial and logistical responsibilities, though persistent, were now approached with foresight and planning rather than reactive stress. Budgeting, scheduling, and task delegation became mechanisms for reducing friction rather than sources of conflict. One miscommunication, one lapse in patience, or one overlooked tension could trigger setbacks. Amy and Tammy approached these vulnerabilities with humility and vigilance, establishing systems for accountability and mutual support. They implemented check-ins, reflective exercises, and open forums for expressing concerns, creating a culture of continuous improvement rather than complacency. By acknowledging the impermanence of stability, they cultivated resilience, adaptability, and proactive problem-solving skills that fortified both individual and collective growth. Amy's reflections often extended to existential considerations, the nature of family, the role of public visibility, and the pursuit of authentic fulfillment. She considered the ways in which past patterns had constrained her life and the opportunities that present growth afforded. By examining the interplay of past experiences, present actions, and future aspirations, she cultivated a sense of intentionality and narrative coherence. Life was no longer a series of reactive episodes, but a deliberately navigated journey, punctuated by conscious choice, reflection, and the ongoing pursuit of alignment between values, actions, and relationships. The culmination of Amy and Tammy's journey was not marked by a single dramatic event, but by the quiet accumulation of choices, reflections, and actions that redefined their family. Over months and years, The sisters observed how the interplay of intentionality, empathy, and accountability transformed not only their own behaviors, but the very atmosphere of the home. Conflict, once a central pillar of daily life, became rare. When it did arise, it was met with tools and strategies cultivated through experience, introspection, and mutual commitment. Amy's relationship with herself had evolved profoundly. She no longer equated emotional intensity with authenticity, nor allowed shame to dictate her responses. This meta-awareness strengthened emotional agility, enabling them to navigate challenges with foresight and intentionality rather than reactionary patterns rooted in habit or past conditioning. By the final stages of this journey, the Slaton household embodied a balance that had previously seemed unattainable. Conflict had not disappeared entirely, nor had past struggles been erased. Rather, the family had developed a robust toolkit for navigating tension, sustaining connection, and fostering growth. Each sister carried lessons learned into daily practice, and these choices reverberated throughout the household, shaping behaviors, moods, and shared experiences. The evolution was ongoing, dynamic, and lived in the everyday interactions that defined family life. Amy, in particular, recognized the profound implications of this journey. Personal growth, relational resilience, and public accountability had converged to create a life that was simultaneously challenging, rich, and deeply meaningful. She understood that the process of transformation was never complete, that vigilance, reflection, and intentionality would remain lifelong companions. Yet, she also acknowledged that the trajectory was fundamentally different from where it had begun, a testament to courage, perseverance, and the transformative potential of conscious choice. In the final analysis, the story of Amy and Tammy Slaton was not merely one of dramatic conflict, public scrutiny, or sensationalized family drama. It was a story of human resilience, relational intelligence, and the slow, deliberate work of transformation. Theirs was a narrative defined not by the moments when everything fell apart, but by the cumulative decisions, reflections, and actions that rebuilt, strengthened, and redefined what family could be. The Slaton sisters emerged not as figures of spectacle, but as exemplars of intentional living, demonstrating that growth, authenticity, and connection, though challenging and ongoing, were attainable with courage, humility, and perseverance. Through the lens of their experiences, viewers could witness the profound complexity of family life, the interplay of emotion, behavior, circumstance, and choice, the enduring influence of past patterns, and the power of deliberate action in shaping the future. Amy and Tammy's journey offered a mirror to audiences, inviting reflection on personal relationships, emotional growth, and the pursuit of authenticity. The story closed not with a dramatic climax, but with a quiet, enduring resonance, a testament to the capacity for change, healing, and sustained connection in the face of adversity.